Welcome to USC Ideas and Actions, the official University of Southern California podcast. Shows are webcast live on Facebook from Studio 1A in the USC Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism.
I'm Professor Travis Longcore of the USC School of Architecture and the USC Spatial Sciences Institute. I work on and study nature in cities.
And I'm Kelly Sanders. I'm an assistant professor of civil and environmental engineering, and I also wear a hat of being a residential faculty here on campus. So that means I actually live here on campus, where I've done some sustainability initiatives. But my research here is about the energy, water, food nexus, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
So we want to thank Annenberg for hosting us here today for a conversation around the holiday of Earth Day. It's sort of the biggest secular holiday of the planet. And this is, Earth Day was founded in 1970, so this is the 48th Earth Day, and really kicked off an era in the 70s of environmental reform. The Clean Air Act that helped eliminate smog here in Los Angeles and around the country was passed in 1972. The Endangered Species Act was passed and signed in 1973. The Clean Water Act, although it was around before then, was updated and got its name, Clean Water Act, in 1972 as well. And at that first Earth Day, which was Sunday, April 22nd, 1970, some of the notable speakers there were consumer advocate Ralph Nader, who was at the leading edge then of trying to reform sort of consumer protections, and also for my discipline, the landscape architect Ian McHarg, who was sort of the father of environmental overlay analysis with maps, and that puts together things that I work on, maps and environment and planning, was a speaker there as well, Ian McHarg. And the theme to this year's Earth Day celebration is to end plastic pollution. And that's an issue that has increased over those years. In 1970, there were 25 million metric tons of plastics produced globally, and this past year there were 400 million metric tons of plastics produced. So this is an issue that has exploded over that period, and is something that people who are celebrating Earth Day around the world are looking to educate and point out some personal actions that people can take to help deal with that issue. Do you have any work with overlaps with plastic pollution?
I don't do a lot myself with plastic pollution, but I actually have a husband whose main business is really developing biodegradable plastic, so plastic that can actually break down in the marine environment. So he's really, really passionate about these issues, and because of that, I've become quite literate on the issue. And it's a difficult one. It's going to require international cooperation to really address the issue and to deal with the plastic pollution at the source. And that's a challenge, but there's a lot of organizations and a lot of good people that are starting to think about it.
Right. So in the spirit of Earth Day today, we're going to talk about some of the research that we're doing here at USC and some connections to the real world, and take your questions. So maybe Kelly, you can start with some of the work that you're doing.
Yeah. So again, I'm assistant professor in civil and environmental engineering. And really what my work is looking at is these interdependencies between energy systems, water systems, and food systems. So on the energy side, we actually use a lot of water for doing things like producing oil and gas, for cooling our big thermal power plants, which are like nuclear power plants, coal-fired power plants, diesel-fueled power plants or generators. Those actually require a lot of water for cooling those facilities. We also use a lot of water for irrigating biofuels. We actually mix a lot of corn starch-based ethanol into our gasoline. That takes a lot of water. So the energy system has these huge water consequences that I'm looking at. And kind of on the other side of that, I look at the energy embedded in the water system. So whether it's for water treatment or water pumping or water remediation or even water heating, we use a lot of energy in the United States for our water system. We've done some analysis to find that actually 13% of all of the water that we use nationally is dedicated to the water system. So what this nexus, this energy water nexus as I'll call it, means is that a constraint to energy production can be water if your water resources aren't adequate. And a constraint on water can be a constraint on energy, basically, and a constraint on energy can be a constraint on water. And we're seeing this around the world. Here locally in California, we have the system where 90% or so of all of the water that enters our city, so our drinking water sources, originate hundreds of miles away, which means that we have to pump those water resources over large mountains. And now if we bring the food component into this, it gets even more challenging because our food system requires a lot of energy for driving tractors and for processing our food, for example. And obviously, it requires a lot of water. Here in California, 80% of all of the water that we use is dedicated to agriculture. So I'm really looking at the tensions between these different resources, but also the opportunities. Because when we save a unit of electricity, for example, we're saving the water embedded in that unit of electricity that we didn't have to use to generate it. And on the other side, when we save a gallon of water, we save all of that electricity. So there's this nice little relationship. So we're looking at this issue around the world, and it's becoming quite pertinent, you know, when we look at issues such as Cape Town potentially running out of water, you know, this concept of day zero, which maybe we'll get to, or Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is a case in which the electricity system went out first, and then they lost access to potable water. In agriculture, obviously, here locally with the California drought, farmers lost access to their water resources. And because of that, a lot of them switched to these big pumps that are very energy dependent because they had to lift that water out of the ground. So those are some of the challenges that we're working on, both locally and globally. And it's kind of neat to see these things kind of manifest out in the news and kind of see where our work is relevant.
Well, maybe I can just sort of add in something where this intersects with my work, which is looking at nature in cities and how cities function sort of as systems, what's coming in, what's going out, and also the other species that are here in the city with us. And that's around the issue of lawn conversions, right? Because if you think about lawn conversions strictly from the water perspective, it leads you to one sort of conclusion, which is eliminate your water use altogether and go completely with succulents and gravel and things like that, which is interestingly sort of reflects a misunderstanding of our climate. Here in Los Angeles, we have a Mediterranean type climate, which means we do have rain in the winter and enough rainfall to support shrubs that would live around the year. But when you think about it just from a water perspective, you kind of ignore also some of the energy things. And where we get to energy there is during some of the conversions that have happened of lawns to more drought-tolerant vegetation, people have not sort of factored in how they're going to keep their trees alive at the same time. And these trees, even though they're all sort of planted and sort of kept alive through being watered in most instances, there's a energy nexus to that, which is one of the ways that the city stays livable is through a tree canopy. And that tree canopy reduces energy consumption. So if you start looking at it as a holistic system, as your work does, where you're connecting the energy to the water, to other features, then you come to a different conclusion. And it's probably worth it to even bring the water in to keep the trees alive for the amount of energy and water use that's embodied in the energy.
Yeah, and thinking about that project, there's a lot of room for collaboration here, Travis, because one of the things that I'm looking at now with one of my colleagues, George Van Weiss, is how you actually change the albedo of the landscape when you make those conversions from grass to other types of plants, or you reduce tree canopy or you lose tree canopy, because we have this thing in Los Angeles called the urban heat island. Yeah. So all of these issues are relevant to this topic of Earth Day today. Obviously, we have a lot of challenges associated with the Earth, whether it be here locally or whether it be globally, but there's also a lot of opportunities. So I want to focus on those opportunities here, because we've had a lot of wins here recently, both globally and of course from the statewide, because California has been really, really progressive when it comes to acting on the environment. So some of the things that have happened, you know, in the last decade from a California perspective is we've created really strong greenhouse gas regulation. So we're getting serious about how many climate forcing emissions we're putting into the atmosphere. And we're doing that through things like this conversion to renewable energy. So we have very strong renewable energy goals. The governor has made a lot of policies that facilitate those goals, such as a switch to electric vehicles. He just announced that he wants eventually 5 million electric vehicles, which will help facilitate some of those greenhouse gas reductions. When we look at the international perspective, we just had the Paris Climate Change Accord, which was a very successful international collaboration where countries around the world have gotten together and voiced their commitment to greenhouse gas reductions. Of course, right now there's some question marks on what the long-term role of the United States will be in that policy agreement. But, when you talk about Earth Day and you talk about the things that we care about, whether it's water, whether it's energy, whether it's food production, whether it's plastics in the ocean, climate change is really going to be a forcing function on all of those systems because those systems are really interdependent. So it's nice to see the local action and the global action that we're seeing there.
And, climate is an interesting thing, but the same token, we sometimes forget that when we move on to the new biggest challenge, that some of the old challenges still need to be worked on.
Right.
So the issue of access to open space and livable environments, the issue of species conservation, of biodiversity decline, these things didn't go away when we sort of, I would say, refined and popularized the issue of climate change. Which has been known, the physics of it has been known for a very, very long time. But I did want to mention, that we have a lot of things that we have done even since the last Earth Day, the first Earth Day, that are successes, and we know how to do these things. And so, for example, the ozone hole and the international agreements to reduce emissions of ozone-depleting chemicals, it was really an international and global success. We have the banning of DDT and the resulting recovery of the raptors and birds that were spoken about in Silent Spring. This came through regulatory action that was successful and beyond all imagination. Another issue would be the use of lead shot, which is use of lead as a way to kill animals for hunting. It's been banned in hunting of waterfowl. And although as I said, these battles keep going, we've only just recently acted to ban lead shot in areas where there's recovery of the California condor, because they will eat the leftover carcasses that are left on the landscape and are susceptible to lead poisoning, and as we know from places like Flint, Michigan, and the consequences of exposure to lead across all higher organisms are bad. And so they kill birds and they reduce the cognitive ability of young developing minds. So this is an issue that we know we can solve these things. There are alternatives, and we've seen the successes. And it's a matter of recognizing that the progress that we made and continue to make is hard fought and can be reversed.
Yeah, and I think that this point is really important I think it's easy to get overwhelmed when you look at some of the issues in the developing countries. For example, one of the biggest stories this winter was the air pollution in Indian cities such as Mumbai and Beijing, and so air quality is one of the biggest sources of early mortality of anything that we can't control. So some of the things that kill us are lifestyle choices like smoking or diet related, but air pollution is the biggest source of bad things to happen for us, for the things that we can't control. But there's a lot of ways that we can use the lessons that we've learned here in the United States and across developed countries, such as, here in Los Angeles just a few decades ago. From here, where we sit at USC, you couldn't see the mountains, right? And so, thanks to even work that's been done here locally at USC, we've made remarkable improvements in terms of air quality. In the 70s, one of the events that provoked the formation of the EPA was that a river in Ohio actually was on fire. So there were so many chemicals in this river that it was able to spark, ignite, and this water was on fire. And obviously that created some incredible imagery to really catalyze us as a nation to care about this issue. But these are issues that, we've addressed here. I won't go as far as to say that we solved them because we can always make more progress. But we know how to address a lot of these challenges. So when you think about some of the things that are going on as countries get richer, they tend to get richer, they tend to pollute themselves, and then they tend to get better once they have those resources. So that's something to watch around the world, which I think is, a good news story here, is we know how to address a lot of these problems.
And it goes along with having the resources to do that. So in your work, what are some of the things that when people say, I'm fascinated by your research, Professor Sanders, what can I do? What do you tell them?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of things that you can, if we focus on kind of this energy, water, food issue, there's a lot of things that we can do in our day-to-day life. You can do things like use less water in your showers and, turn off the water when you brush your teeth. Those things are all great, but in terms of the low-hanging fruit here in California, for example, or in Los Angeles more specific, if you have a lawn, figure out what you can do not to water it. Because of all of the water that we use from an urban perspective, we've done a pretty good job getting efficient from an indoor perspective. So when you look at all of the water that comes into the cities of California, about half go to indoor use, and we've already done a lot of interventions like low-flow shower heads and low-flow toilets and those types of things. So really the golden opportunity is how you can reduce that outdoor watering use, because sometimes you're growing food, but a lot of times we're just mindlessly growing or grass, right, which isn't really facilitating much in terms of the environment. From the energy perspective, there's certainly a lot of things that we can do, and I think one of the really interesting things that's going on here in California is we've gotten really aggressive about our renewable energy goals. And I think that's really exciting from a consumer perspective, because the consumer will very shortly become a critical element in incorporating this renewable energy resource. So right now, for example, our solar panels can generate electricity when the sun is shining, but as soon as that sun goes down, that electricity isn't available to us. So we've actually implemented so much solar here in California that there are hours of the year where we actually generate so much we can't use it all. So from a customer standpoint, I think, in the next couple of years, you're going to see your utilities urging you to use that electricity when the sun's available, so we can use that clean electricity during the day and perhaps reduce some of our fossil fueled energy during the night, which I think is an exciting
and then, of
opportunity.
Course, batteries on the horizon.
Yeah.
I mean, so people ask me as well. One of the issues that I work on is light pollution and the effects that lights at night have on wildlife, where I started, in the ecosystem, the environment, but also in dealing with colleagues, also on human health and sleep and things. And just to sleep in the dark is a really productive thing to do there. Just like with my work on urban landscapes, seeing green and having a place to decompress and see some birds and some butterflies is actually really good for one's mental health.
Yeah.
But every time I say that, I have this little twinge, because the truth of the matter is that not everyone can afford to have blackout curtains, or to live next to a garden, or to be able to hike in the mountains. And some of the environmental education programs that I'm involved with, there are students who live right next to, say, the Baldwin Hills in the middle of Los Angeles and have never been up the hill to even see the Los Angeles Basin or the Hollywood sign or anything like that. And so along with this becomes also the question of making sure that we're building a society where these opportunities are available for everybody, no matter what zip code they live in, no matter what their resources are, no matter whether their landlord has invested in blackout shades or not. That we recognize and sort of take collective action. So I think on Earth Day is a great time to think about that, because it really was, at the outset, it was a movement, and it was a political movement, and motivated people and galvanized people to understand about the challenges of the environment, and led to these legislative breakthroughs and regulatory and policy breakthroughs, and that needs to actually consider. Just because those things were done doesn't mean we don't still have to cultivate and build a constituency for the whales, for old growth forests, for the endangered species, the butterflies. I work on a couple of endangered butterflies here in California, and they're continue to be threatened and challenged, and all of these issues that we've talked about, all this progress. And that's where the individual actions matter. You can go out today and decide not to take a plastic straw,
right,
and not put that into the waste stream, and also to get engaged with organizations, whatever they might be. Because there's so many ways to do this, but to get engaged in these issues, get educated about them, and try to go forward and make those changes at the individual level, and also coming together as a society to keep the pressure on people who are, frankly, get elected to make good decisions that are going to continue the progress that's been made in the 48 years since 1970.
Yeah, and one of the things I love that you raised was this issue of equity, because there's huge issues involved with any type of environmental problem. This idea of environmental injustice, right? So generally, poor people, for example, or underserved communities are generally in the dirtiest, most polluted parts of the city, and perhaps those parts of the cities don't have as much land cover as other parts of the city, which
tree cover, yeah.
Yeah, tree cover.
In the urban forestry literature, the paper is trees grow on money.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, you think, and this shouldn't be the case because of the centrality of that to a living environment. And if we think about cities, you mentioned the urban heat island effect. What the urban heat island effect means is that cities are already a number of degrees warmer than the countrysides, and higher extreme temperatures. And that means cities are the training grounds for climate change and increased temperatures. And the most effective line of defense is trees, is a healthy urban forest. And so that is something where the injustice, and I look at also not just the sort of environmental bads that are out there, and this is is environmental racism, the citing of facilities that have pollution and exposure to the population in communities that are not white, frankly.
Yeah.
And that holds true, that we need to do that, but we also need to even go beyond that and look at sort of access to nature as a right that goes along with this as well, access to open space, and ensuring that we don't just sort of, as we go to improve our environment, we don't unequally put the benefits of that in different communities.
Yeah, and one project that I've been working on here at USC, again, just to remind you, I mentioned that I live here at USC. So
yes.
I live with 650
yes.
freshmen voluntarily. And one of the projects that we've been working on as a community is to install an urban garden. So we've developed some beds. We have what's called a solar-powered aquaponics system. And aquaponics is this idea that you create the symbiotic relationship between fish and plants. So the fish produce waste. That waste is essentially nitrogen that can be fed to the plants uptake that nitrogen, effectively cleaning the water, and that cycle starts again. So this is something that we've been thinking about from a research perspective. How could we incorporate these systems into refugee camps? How could we get this into homeless communities so that you can increase green space while also giving people access to fresh organic foods in food deserts?
Well, and frankly, a connection to the way the world works.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, because it is easy. I had the great fortune to grow up in a rural environment with parents who grew a vegetable garden every year.
And most of us haven't seen that.
Yeah, and I would say that the percentage of my students who grew up in that environment is diminishing every year. And I've done this sort of experiment for years with big classes. I'll ask the class how many brands of breakfast cereal they can name. And we can get up to 10, 20 real quick, or a number of sneaker brands or whatnot. And then I'll say, how many species of birds can you name from the campus? And there's this sort of silence that goes over the room, and they're like the black ones. And then maybe there's somebody who comes from a farming background or a rural background who can start and name some of the birds. But, and in one sense, we shouldn't blame people, because everyone learns and becomes familiar with the environment that is necessary for them to understand and learn. But by the same token, it sort of alienates us from the world that has to produce the food and what we call ecosystem services, the clean air, the clean water, the respite, the emotional respite for us, which is the natural world. And if we don't have understanding of that, and one of the ways we get understanding is nothing gets you to understand plants and predation and ecosystems better than trying to fight off, cabbage butterflies on your cabbage crops.
That's what I always think about.
when you're growing your garden.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and I think, this connection to the environment is so important. And I think that's one of the most critical aspects to really appreciate about Earth Day is this fact that it recenters us and reminds us that there is this broader Earth because, by 2050, the projections out are that 80% of us are going to live in cities. And we all live in cities with these little devices that consume our attention all the time. And I think, sometimes the kids growing up forget that, seeing a Paragon falcon on a screen, for example, isn't the same as going for a hike in Yosemite and seeing those birds in the nature. So I think Earth Day is one of the reminders that, we need to go and engage in that natural environment to really appreciate what we've got. And so that's one of the challenges, I think, with urbanization is continuing to have that connection.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting sort of double-edged sword because on the one hand, you see the devices and you think of it as alienating, and on the other hand, there are all these cool apps now that are sort of creating a resurgence in natural history and what's called citizen science or volunteer science, which is using the mobile devices that record date and time and place and have people taking pictures of things. That then it will go up into a community environment where experts will actually chime in and help identify something if you don't know what it is. And this platform I'm talking about is called iNaturalist. It was built out of the Academy of Science in San Francisco. And our Natural History Museum across the street here in Los Angeles County is very involved. And there are a number of programs, and there are true advances in science that are happening from individuals who, as a hobby, as an avocation, as a whim even, are out and documenting their world and sharing it with other people and building a community around that. And that gives me some hope for cultivating those interests and the engagement, and also letting us learn lessons then that can lead to management actions, because sometimes there's bad things that people find, invasive species that are taking over in certain places, but when you find them early through a volunteered observation, it can really help get action when it has to happen.
Yeah, I was reading about one of these startup companies recently, and so there's a startup company that has actually developed this device that you put on the bottom of your surfboard, and so while you surf, you're actually you're collecting critical data about the health of the ocean while you're out there having fun. Wow. And I think some of these innovations that can kind of, sneak this data collection into your daily life when you're also having fun is a huge opportunity moving forward with, this idea of this distributed Internet of Things where we can have these connected devices across our environments, but also on our persons while we move throughout the world. So I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, I have to sneak in the fact that some of our researchers here at USC work on harmful algal blooms, which is the sort of overgrowth of algae in the ocean in response to various conditions, and the kinds of data that surfers, who historically have been wonderful allies for and advocates for clean water and healthy oceans, can collect through that. I hadn't heard of that particular project before. That's fascinating.
Yeah, if only I was a good enough surfer to take advantage of the technology. But, we all have aspirations, I think.
Yeah. So what we'd like to do is maybe take some questions that are coming in from the audience. What is your biggest environmental concern for the future? I'll let you start on that one.
Okay. What is my biggest? Well, I mean, if we're speaking in broad terms, I think my biggest concern is climate change, because, climate change is one of those forces that is going to exacerbate a lot of our pre-existing environmental problems. I think one of the things, the way that I think about climate change is it kind of puts the hydrological cycle or the water cycle on steroids. So, some areas will get wetter, some areas will get drier, but on average, we're going to get warmer. And, I do a lot of work on the water supply. And the thing that I worry about a lot is it's not enough to rain anymore. It doesn't matter, for example, in California, if it's a wet year or if it's a dry year, if we don't get snowpack. So a third of our water supply is locked up in snowpack, and we depend on that snow to melt slowly throughout the year such that we have water during the dry season. And so even if we have a really wet year, but it all comes down as rain, we lose access to that water during the summer. And there's billions of people across the world, for example, that are dependent on snowpack. So as those level gets reduced, here in California, we're rich enough, we'll figure it out. But the rest of the world that's really dependent on those snowpack resources, climate change is really going to exacerbate those tensions, and those are really hard challenges to solve. So climate change is really the thing on my mind.
Mm-hmm. And I would say that for me, it's biodiversity and the biodiversity crisis, because it's sort of become the forgotten crisis. If you look back to the mid '90s, and we had things like Fern Gully, the movie that was out, and everyone was caring about the caring about the rainforest and whatnot. And the thing is, we need the natural world, and to protect the natural world for all these services. And the reason I put it over climate change even is the loss of biodiversity. And because if we make the decisions necessary to protect biodiversity and open space and functioning landscapes, we're actually going to make the decisions that are going to deal with climate as well. But it is possible, I think, unfortunately, to take a very technological approach to climate change that ends up with a world that's devoid of other life and doesn't respect the sort of both need of and inherent moral value of other species. And so that concerns me, because I find people going after things that really, I'll just give an example, and I apologize. I love my friends at UCLA, and I used to work there. But there was a building that was put up. It was LEED platinum or plutonium or whatever level it was, the highest. And they're like, and we don't have any outdoor landscaping, so we saved all that water. Yeah. I'm just like, I get it, but it's like we need to live in an environment that enriches us, and having nature in our environments is one of those things. And so I think that for me is a little bit of change in the frame, something that people have forgotten, but really is going to come back to the fore, because it also results in pandemics. Mm-hmm. As we do things that are bad for forests, all these diseases that could come through, Ebola, etc. There's a lot of danger to us that needs to be taken every bit as seriously as climate, and climate threatens biodiversity as well. So I'm not discounting that by any stretch. It's just that's where my concern is, because of the ability to forget, and what a world that would be if we forgot it.
We're getting another question, which is,
how are we going to get the world to follow California's environmental lead?
That's a really good question. Well, I mean, I think the question is very astute in its fact that it's realizing that California is really being a climate leader. And I think for me, the most compelling case that California is making in terms of being really, really aggressive in terms of its climate change action is that we've done so with a very, very healthy economy. So I think that California has proven that you don't necessarily have to decouple, climate change action and environmental action from economic growth. We've been able to do very good economically, and even use it as an engine to grow some aspects of our economy. So we're developing this clean energy economy, which has spurred a wealth of startups and companies that are now doing very well. It's changing the way that we're doing transportation and the power sector across the state. So I think as California proves itself as this case study that we've been able to make a lot of change, and do so without these economic impacts, I think that becomes really compelling. And I think what the world is going to see, I'm an energy analyst at my core, the growth industries of the future are not the growth industries of the past. So things like oil and gas were very good investments in the past, but what's going to propel us into this next stage of the future is really these green economies. But to your point, just, all of these things are interconnected, so we have to make a point not to make the same mistakes as we move to this renewable energy economy, because there's no energy technologies or no water technologies that have zero impact on the environment.
So, question, what is the role for USC and academics to lead on environment? I'll start on that one, which is, I think that for me, my primary goal is to ensure that the students who come to USC and work at all levels are exposed to and have skills and aptitude around the environment and the tools that they need to go out and to solve them. And that's our primary mission, is education. And then along with that is research, and we can point to any number of places where USC is a leader in environmental research, and that is the thing that we do here, and how we deliver that is with a commitment, and a commitment that's been expressed, I think, time and again also to equity and diversity in the environment, and that's a value that's, I think, been re-articulated and committed to here at USC. So I think that's the things that we do, and of course, as professors and researchers, outreach from the university to policymakers and engagement in the community and things. So, and not that this is any great laudable example, but I serve on a review board for the County of Los Angeles to help review development proposals to ensure that they comply with the regulations that are in place and minimize their impact on the environment in the Santa Monica Mountains coastal zone. Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, these are the kinds of things that we can do to share our expertise and ensure that it gets out there into society, and that we share also those experiences and know-how back to our students who are going to go be the next leaders.
Yeah, and I think, the point that you make is, any way you cut it, USC is an intellectual leader in our community. And so, as an anecdote, this garden that we've been developing in the back of one of the dormitories here at USC, we actually built that in conjunction with a number of K through 12 teachers. And so what those teachers did is they learned how to do it here at USC. We made some mistakes and we made some lessons learned, but they went back to their schools, and then they developed those systems for their own students. We've also had a lot of K through 12 classes come through and see the garden. So, what starts here by serving as an example, I think also permeates through our community, which is really important.
Right, and I'll give another example, which is the incredibly large stormwater management system that was installed at the new University Village, which was done under a regulatory framework. There are something called low impact development guidelines, and they not only met those, but once they got into it, they decided to go beyond them. And that is capturing water that would otherwise flow off into the ocean, and allows it to percolate back down into the aquifer that's underneath the campus of USC here. And works very well and provides an opportunity for education. So I took one of my classes on ecological factors in design. We had the manufacturer of the dry wells come out, the construction manager, and so all of these students from landscape architecture and geodesign and architecture, we could go out, we look at the system, see how it works, understand why it was put in, and understand the considerations that will go into designing those in the future. And that happens because it's there, and it's our obligation under code and civically to do so, but also that the people involved here at USC in construction management went the extra mile and we're installing dry wells now also across the street at the Coliseum. So it'll help drain the field faster after storm events. So I think these things add up, and we share them, and they also can sort of permeate through the environment into the teaching environment and the research environment, so that we can be making these changes and sustain them and transform the city.
Great. Well, on that, I think that was, wrapping this conversation up on a very positive note. So we'd like to thank Annenberg for having us and hosting us in their beautiful facility here. I thank Travis, my colleague, for sharing some of his experiences, and this has been really fun. Thank you to our audience, and happy Earth Day.
Thanks for listening. Subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Facebook.